Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Germany invaded Switzerland. Switzerland is a neutral nation with a long history. It is a multilingual country but has a huge German-speaking part in it. However, most German-speaking Swiss, they never really consider themselves as Germans. They consider themselves to be Swiss citizens. Moreover, Switzerland has a very good advantage compared to other countries, and that is the geography. Additionally, the Swiss had a few plans where they would be able to defend their country and use several defensive lines that were given to them by the nature. Neutrality is also something one shouldn't underestimate. With Swiss neutrality, many diplomats could meet in there, and many countries at war had a possibility to talk on a neutral soil. The Swiss were also known to have kept a lot of Nazi gold, a possible reason why the so-called Operation Tannenbaum was never executed. Let's not forget that after the surrender of France, Switzerland was surrounded by Axis powers. Hitler considered the Swiss to be the enemies to the new Germany, and he said that, I quote, "Switzerland possesses the most disgusting and miserable people and a political system." He also called the Swiss, and I quote, "a misbegotten branch of our folk." At the end, the Swiss, they were still considered German, of course, just like the Nazis considered the Dutch, the Flemings, or the Luxembourgers as German. However, Operation Barbarossa was a higher priority for the Germans, and also many other things they happened in between. And thus, as a result, Operation Tannenbaum was never executed. But what if all of that changed? What if Germany invaded Switzerland? The best point of divergence is somewhere after the fall of France and before Operation Barbarossa. Italy would be keen on helping the Germans out because Mussolini laid claims on Ticino, and as for France, they too could probably collaborate and take Romandy if they were allowed to do so. But this may be a little bit more doubtful. In 1940, there was a Roundtable Conference between the Italian and German foreign ministers, which was also attended by Hitler, by the way. Let's say that Hitler would, after the Roundtable, favor a destruction of Switzerland to ensure that there was no pimple on the face of Europe, as he once said. Himmler would, as in OTL, create the Germanische SS Schweiz, but much earlier on than in our timeline, and many of the plans for Barbarossa, for instance, they would be delayed or revised. Let's also assume that the Italians would push for an invasion of Switzerland, and instead of starting the conflict in Greece, they would indeed go first for Switzerland in the hopes that Germany would invade as well, and also because of the very positive response that Hitler got after the conference he attended. Hitler would be furious at the solo action of Mussolini and not like the fact that Mussolini would suddenly invade the Swiss, but he would send some troops to guard the Rhine border that Germany and Switzerland both share, and would invade from Romandy and eastern Switzerland. Liechtenstein would either see a coup happening or just be overrun like Luxembourg was. Switzerland's defensive plan was called Redux National, or national reduction. Once the first defensive lines would have been crossed by enemy forces, the Swiss would have retreated to higher mountains. The Germans would not have many casualties, and the blitzkrieg tactic, that would not be a viable option. While the Italians could push and suffer less casualties due to the experience they had in the short conflict with France, and this conflict was fought in the Alps. Germany and Italy would agree on starving the rest of Switzerland. Switzerland could have several pockets which could last for a month or a bit more, but after that it would have been conquered. After a maximum of 2 to 3 months, perhaps even after 1 month already, Switzerland would have been conquered. Why is that, you may say? Well, geography in that case is not everything. And yes, even if the Swiss could have some reserves, at some point the Swiss will be starved out if they are encircled by enemy forces. Moreover, the Axis powers, they could also send their planes in there. They would also have probably some people who could collaborate, and the Swiss, due to the neutrality, would never even have had allies who could help them. Yes, sure, the allies were already in a conflict, and perhaps some other countries would have reacted in a way or another, but I think that an invasion of Switzerland would not have been that destructive for Germany, and that the Germans or the Axis powers would have been capable to do so. Would Germany suffer losses? Yes, of course it would suffer losses. Resources would have been wasted, and no more resources would have been gained, except maybe for gold and some money and, well, some territories. Yes, some Swiss could have been taken and recruited into the Wehrmacht, but I think that's about it. Moreover, Germany's and Italy's reputation would suffer tremendously in this war. Much of World War II would follow a similar trajectory. The Italians would still go for Greece, but Yugoslavia in this alternate timeline may have become an Axis member. The Italians and Germans would have the Operation 20. The Italians and Germans would have the Operation 25 plan ready, but just like Operation Tannenbaum in our timeline, in that other timeline, this Operation 25 would have never been executed. So probably in that alternate timeline, people would have been talking about Operation 25 instead of talking about Operation Tannenbaum. German troops, they would just go through Yugoslavia, support the Italians, and Yugoslavia too would perhaps even have gotten parts of Greece. I'm thinking about Macedonia, for instance. Italy would not like Yugoslavia as Axis member, and Hungary too wouldn't be all too happy about it. But Italy and Hungary would still get some territories here and there, which would keep them, for now, in that moment, quiet. The invasion of the Soviet Union would be delayed, just like almost everything else in this alternate World War II. However, Japanese actions in the Pacific, they wouldn't change, and the US still enters the war. The Axis powers would attack the Soviets at a more convenient time, and perhaps even push them a little bit further than in OTL, even have more manpower. But even with all of that in mind, I don't think that an Axis victory would be realistic. Moreover, with an occupied Switzerland, more resources would have been drained in keeping this territory in check. Sure, it wouldn't be the world, but it would have an impact nonetheless. At the end of this alternate World War II, we may see several outcomes which would change. First of all, the Soviets will have more damage, they will have more destruction, and they will also have a smaller bloc. Poland may either be split between the Soviets and the West, or most of Germany, if not all, would be Western. Czechia too would fall in the Western sphere of influence, while Slovakia would fall in the Soviet sphere of influence. Yugoslavia could have switched sides at the end of World War II and become part of the West, while Albania would have been set free from the Italians. Greece could either join the Soviet side on their own, depending on how the Greek Civil War would go, and I think that with a pro-Western Yugoslavia and pro-Western Albania, as well as the West being too nice to Italy for the Greeks, a move to the Soviet side would be very possible. And we could even see a communist Greece. as a result of it. But this communist Greece wouldn't become just like a Warsaw Pact member. No. The Greeks, they would have their own independent communist policies, yet their foreign policy would be very pro-Soviet. Bulgaria and Romania would also be part of the Soviet bloc, and I believe that Turkey would still become part of the West. Austria, Switzerland and Liechtenstein would be freed from German, respectively Italian rule. Switzerland could even have gained additional territory from Germany, such as Büsingen, for instance, which is totally encircled by the Swiss territory, and they would also have gained some minor territories from Italy. I'm looking at parts of Como, for instance. It is possible that these three countries, Liechtenstein, Austria and Switzerland, they could form something similar like the Benelux. Benelux was formed because those three states, they were small on their own and they wanted to have a bigger and more important voice within the Allies and get their demands set. As a result, the other three countries, the Alp countries, they would see it and they would probably imitate to also get their own demands set and met. Because otherwise, maybe Liechtenstein wouldn't even gain independence again. Switzerland would also deal with their own problems after World War II, such as Nazi sympathizers being on trial, for instance. They would also discuss the role of supporters of the Nazis. They would also discuss many other things. And we could see a change, a political change happening, in which Swiss neutrality may be totally given up. Luxembourg was officially neutral, for instance, but after being invaded so many times, they gave this concept of neutrality up. Switzerland may do the same. Austria would surely not be neutral because the Soviets would have never even gained an occupation zone in Austria, and Liechtenstein would have no choice but to follow its neighbors. The German language in Switzerland could see a decline in popularity, and more people could use French, Italian, and even Romansh, which could see a revival. At the end, the Cold War would be very different, and we could see less neutral or bloc-free states within Europe. Perhaps Poland might become one, or just Finland would be the only exception of a bloc-free state. The Cold War could also be much shorter, and with Swiss neutrality gone, Switzerland may even be a member of the NATO and the predecessor of the European Union, and later be a member of the European Union. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.